Holy City Center Radio. This is episode 51. I am your host, Christian Sanger. Thank you for joining me. A little subdued here at the beginning, you may have noticed, as everything is the worst. I'm being slightly dramatic, but, with all the gun violence and stuff, you know how I kind of get worked up and upset about those things. We've had nonstop gun violence. It keeps happening. And then every time you think there's some good news, like some other terrible things happen. So we'll get into that in a minute. First, thank you so much for joining me. A few things to get to. Just a quick first good news type thing. I haven't done a whole lot over the last few weeks, but I did go to an event recently. It was an event at Buxton Books, this really cool downtown bookstore on King Street. Fairly new. I think they're just a few years old. Locally owned and operated, and you should definitely check it out when you have the chance. They host author events, and so one I went to was for a book called This Will Not Pass, which was written by New York Times reporters Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns. Only Jonathan Martin was able to be there. If those names sound familiar, they are, like I said, journalists with the New York Times, but they are also the guys who released the tape of Kevin McCarthy talking about the 25th Amendment with Trump. After he denied it from the reporting, they then released a tape of him saying it. So you may remember them from that. The book is about the whole election as well as the fallout from it. So it's not like a Trump specific book or a Biden specific book. I haven't read all of it, but that's the gist of it. So it was good to hear him talking about stuff. He was also in the Capitol on January 6th, so it was cool hearing him talk about his experience and some of the frightening things that happened that day. The guest host is author, former politician, and CNN analyst Bakari Sellers, which was cool. I hadn't had a chance to meet him in person before, but we have conversed several times over Twitter. So it was cool to meet both of them at the end of the event. They signed books. So I had Bakari sign his book that I have, and then had Jonathan Martin sign the book I mentioned. So that was cool. It was a fun little event. And so that was my good news, fun thing that I did recently since the last episode. Outside of Holy City Center land, some quick local news since the last podcast. Joe Cunningham won the Democratic primary over Mia McLeod, who came in second. There was someone else who was in third, but it wasn't even close. And actually, Cunningham won pretty handily. So he's the Democratic nominee for governor. He'll be going up against Henry McMaster, the incumbent. Nancy Mace won the Republican primary over Katie Arrington for the first congressional district here in Charleston. So she'll be facing off against Democrat Dr. Annie Andrews. Dr. Andrews didn't have a primary opponent, so she was the nominee and didn't have to worry about a primary election. Outside of that, not any real big surprises in this area for the primaries. There's some runoffs that are going on, most notably a Democratic runoff for who will go up against Senator Tim Scott, so we'll keep you posted on that. And the state superintendent race, there's also a runoff on the Republican side, so we'll see who their nominee will be. The other local news, Joe Cunningham got some national attention. He released his first campaign ad for the primary. He had some for the general election. He did release some for the primary. And his ad got him some national attention because he called for an age limit on politicians. He said that we have age limits for other industries, for other jobs. So why not politicians? We shouldn't have these people that are in office for years and years and years, and was making the argument that a lot of them just aren't in touch with what the majority of the population wants. So, some people took exception to that for numerous reasons, but he did get him the national attention, which I think is probably what the campaign was going for. Trying to just get more eyes on him, maybe excite younger voters to come out and vote, because he's going to need lots of help to beat McMaster in this state. So you can go find that ad just by searching Google. It's also on my site, holycitycenter.com. Before we get into the big news from today, the January 6th committee hearings have been going on. I'm not going to, rehash those or go into those too much, but I have been, watching a good chunk of them. And even though we all kind of already knew what happened that day or what the media has previously reported, a lot of different things have come out. And it's pretty interesting stuff. And you realize how close we came to Donald Trump remaining president. Like I said, we kind of knew some stuff, but a lot of behind the scenes things are coming to light because, people have been under oath and been answering questions. So it's shocking some of the things that were suggested by multiple people. And although I don't have much faith in government or people being held accountable for actions, especially old rich white men, but I will still be somewhat surprised if there are not some form of charges against multiple people. It seems pretty clear from the evidence and testimony that several people in our government broke laws and committed crimes and should be held accountable. So we'll see how that all plays out. So I've been watching that, and we'll get into that, as we go forward, and there's some actual news there. All right, then the big news. So we're recording this on Friday, June 24th. Some things, of course, as always, I have to put the caveat out there, may change by Monday when this episode comes out, specifically some of the fallout from this and what some states will do. But should come as no surprise that what I'm referencing is a Supreme Court decision that came out today. The official ruling was on a case called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. It was a case in Mississippi that just moved through the courts. Supreme Court heard it and ruled, without getting into the ins and outs, the end result is effectively overturning Roe v. Wade. Which has left a lot of people understandably upset, infuriated, scared, hopeless, helpless feeling. And obviously there's the other side where people are happy with this decision. It sucks. Established law for over 50 years, just overturned. And we don't really know what the fallout's going to be. We talked about this before, how this was the plan. One of the first episodes, this was the plan that's been in the works for a few decades now, and they accomplished it. And, if the goal is to reduce abortions, end abortions, they will, obviously, because some states are going to ban it and some people won't be able to get an abortion, but it's not going to end abortions, period. And it's definitely not going to end safe abortions, which is sometimes people set these laws and rules and don't realize some of the fallout that will happen, even though they should, because we've been here before and there's plenty of instances and proof and data that shows that this doesn't actually help in the grand scheme of things. We talked about some of the things that did, like access to contraception and, reducing prices on things like birth control pill, and not having, regulations as they are on those, and et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about that. But at this point, it seems to be a moot point because it's happening. So what does this mean for South Carolinians? Well, actually, right now, across the country, abortion is still legal in every single state. Could that change by Monday? Probably not. Although in a couple states, they did have what are called trigger laws that were, if Roe v. Wade was overturned, it would automatically put these laws into effect. So I can't speak for every state. South Carolina tried for a trigger law, and thankfully it didn't happen. So no, abortion will not be illegal in South Carolina come Monday. However, it hasn't happened yet, but Governor Henry McMaster has already said that with this ruling, they plan to move full steam ahead with legislation that he introduced. The fetal heartbeat bill, I think, is what he calls it. So just for reference, a few things that this act would do. And again, sorry, I'm getting distracted here. He'll probably announce sometime today, Friday, that, we're going forward with this, but it'll take long. They're going to have debates and the General Assembly will have to approve it, and, it won't go into effect right away, but it's on its way. You can almost bank on that. So what it does, assuming nothing changes during debates and everything, the first thing, judging by the name, when a heartbeat is detected, you can no longer get an abortion. Previously, I think it was up to 20 weeks in South Carolina. So 20 weeks after that part, you could not have an abortion, but you could before. So when can you hear a heartbeat? You can hear a heartbeat before you may even know you're pregnant. It's, as early as 5 weeks. So a woman who is pregnant might not even know that she is by the time a heartbeat is detected. So we're going from 20 weeks to possibly as low as 5. So just to kind of give you an idea of the dramatic change there. In addition to that, the law also requires an abortionist I don't know why, of course they call it an abortionist, but a doctor, to give a mother the opportunity to view an ultrasound, hear her child's heartbeat, and receive information about her child's development. So the law also requires them to give that option. So if someone does know they're pregnant before the heartbeat is detected, which again is going to be rare unless they have an inkling, whoever they go, Planned Parenthood, doctors, office, whatnot, they have to offer the ultrasound to that mother to give her that opportunity. Previously, they didn't have to offer that. Now we know what's going on there. They're trying to guilt that mother into keeping the child after seeing the ultrasound. That's the intent of it, which we know about, and then that's really what this whole thing is about. So, okay, so that's what we're looking at in South Carolina. Once that's official, we can discuss it more. And I'm sure there'll be protests, and I'm sure there'll be all sorts of things going on, and I'll share those on my social media accounts and all that. So first of all, I am, as most of you probably know, I'm a white man. So I know this doesn't affect me the same way as women, and especially women of color, and not just women of color, but also women that are poor, of any background. So I understand that, and so first, just want to apologize and say I'm sorry on behalf of this decision that happened. I can't imagine, as crappy as I think this decision is, and as much as I'm feeling upset about it, I would imagine for women it is vastly different. So I'm very sorry. With that said, lots of work to do. But there's a lot of other unintended consequences that could come from this. Number one, this is a medical privacy issue. Everyone thinks that it's, this right to abortion, but it's also a medical privacy thing. You no longer, if you get pregnant, you could potentially have your medical information out there. If you have an abortion, that's your call. That's your business. But now it no longer would be in some states. So there's that. So where does that stop? And, a lot of times I joke and laugh at people when legislation's discussed and where does it stop people? Because usually it's silly. It stops at whatever. We heard a lot about this with the Confederate monuments and things coming down. Everyone's like, where does it stop? Are we just going to tear down the entire city of Charleston? And it's usually ridiculous. And it's usually when people aren't even asking for these things. The gun control debate's the same thing. Oh, well, if we take away AR-15s, where does it end from there? Well, no one's going to take every gun in this country. It's just not going to happen. So usually I joke about this stuff, but this is an instance where you can legitimately wonder, because it has already been signaled that it's not going to stop here. We have Clarence Thomas in the Supreme Court, who has already signaled that in his opinion that he released. And I will pull up here. This is from Politico, but you can find it really anywhere. Justice Clarence Thomas argued in his opinion, released this today, Friday, when we're recording, that the Supreme Court should reconsider some other past rulings that codified rights to contraception access, same-sex relationships, same-sex marriage, and yes, interracial marriage. All of these things, he now says, because they're similar to how they were decided by the Supreme Court in the past, he now says that those things should be reconsidered. So, so people are like, yeah, abortion, we want it outlawed. We won this one. Well, now look at what could happen. Contraception access could become a thing of the past if they get their way. Or I know it'll come down to the states. Every state's going to be different. But there are going to be states where it's going to be really, really hard for people to get stuff that they need. So now that also could lead to an increase in pregnancies, which now, because there are people who want to take steps to prevent unwanted pregnancies will have an even harder time to do so. So you're going to make it harder for people to avoid unwanted pregnancies while also saying abortion's illegal. Just, I don't understand. And also, again, same-sex relationships. So we legalized, gay marriage in this country under Obama. Nope. Might be gone. Same-sex marriage, forget it. There's talks of things like, I know it seems silly, but if we could take away the word I'm about to say, but yes, sodomy is also something that could become illegal. What consenting adults want to do in the bedroom, whether same sex or not, is their business. And making certain acts illegal. Now, I understand there's always lines, but this is not a line that should be something that is illegal. Where does it end is a legitimate question in this scenario. And that's really frightening to think about, not to, further frighten people. In addition to that, Supreme Court, they do this in June where they release a lot of rulings. They also ruled a centuries old, or I think it was a century old, New York State gun case where they had basically restrictions on who could open carry. And the Supreme Court, on I think it was Thursday, basically, maybe Wednesday, they said, no, New York can't implement that law anymore. A century-old law, they decided, cannot be done, meaning that people can, open carry in New York, no restrictions, which that's a whole other topic. But I bring that up because that means that they have decided that abortion should be a state's rights thing. The state should be able to decide. But guns, state doesn't have a right to decide that. So states can't put limits on guns, but they can on women's health and the rights to their bodily autonomy. Like, how does that make any sense? I don't get how they can make those two decisions in the same week. It doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, it's just that's all I really have to say on it right now. It's a lot to process, even though we knew that this leaked a couple months ago, that this was coming. I think a lot of us were hopeful that it wouldn't be as bad as it seemed, or maybe something would change, or it didn't. There was no changes. On the plus side, I mentioned the gun case today for some actual good news. It's heading to Biden's desk now, but the bipartisan gun legislation, something finally passed. I was shocked. I thought after Sandy Hook happened and literally nothing got done that we would never do anything. And it's not perfect. It's not even that great, to be honest with you. But there are some very important things that they got done with this bipartisan legislation that not only includes certain regulations with guns, and they've expanded background checks. Although they didn't raise the age limit, they have more in-depth background checks for someone under 21 now. So there's definitely some good things in there. But they've also pledged millions of dollars for mental health services, especially in underserved communities that may not have access to mental health services right now, as well as trying to improve mental health services in schools. So these are all good things, and that is something to be happy about, although it came a day after this whole open carry thing, basically. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It's on the federal level, so if the way the Supreme Court saw it, if the federal government says background checks can be expanded and et cetera, then it's okay. So I don't foresee anything changing there. So that was good as I'm talking about guns. And I would have loved to have just talked about that and gone into more details today, but it doesn't seem as important now. We can talk about that gun legislation later. So yeah, not the best of news, for a lot of people. And I know there may be some people listening who disagree, and that's okay. We can have a debate about it if you want to, but yeah, so I'm sorry. It sucks. But thankfully I have an awesome guest who, just in pure coincidence, we had some kismet where we planned to talk to Chelsea Green, who is a therapist. So that will help this conversation. We'll talk about some other things, but it's going to be talking about mental health. What is the difference between that and mental illness? what to do in times like these, regardless of what side of the fence you are politically. What do you do when something happens that you disagree with? How do you deal with that? And why do things seem so much more intense than maybe they did, even a decade ago when it comes to these bad things in the news? So I think it's super helpful, and I think you all will get a lot out of it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Chelsea Green. Joining me now is my guest, friend of the podcast, friend in real life, Chelsea Green, a licensed therapist, a meditation teacher, and head of community constellations, which we will be discussing a little bit. Chelsea, so good to have you back on the podcast. I don't know if you knew this off the top of your head, but you were last on episode 22, and this is now episode 51. So welcome back.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me, Christian. I'm glad to be back. And I thought you were going to say like 122 or something. So from my perspective, you're so prolific, but I'm honored to be here. And maybe you can invite me back for 122.
There we go. Well, hey, I mean, you might not have to wait that long, though. We could have you before then, of course. But yeah, you're a friend of the podcast now, officially as a return guest. So, it's kind of open door. We can set up future conversations. And, our last conversation was really good. We discussed, of course, you and your background, and then we just talked about mental health and then an event that you were working on. And although some people may remember you, if you could, just real quick, kind of give folks just a quick little bio, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, okay. Well, you introduced me there briefly. I am a licensed therapist in South Carolina. I'm in private practice here in Charleston. I see couples, families, and individual adults working on all sorts of issues that people bring, but mainly in regards to relationships, mental health in as far as anxiety and depression, some mood disorders, really just the things that show up in our daily life as obstacles, including in our relationships, that make things a little harder than sometimes it feels like they need to be. And, I'm not separate from my clients. There's that saying, we teach what we most need to learn ourselves. And so I'm a student of life, and I bring that perspective into the therapy session. And it's really important for me to build a relationship with clients so that not only is it a place that they can maybe learn about themselves, but that a place where we can also learn together what it's like to be in an authentic and in real time dynamic relationship together. So that to me is what therapy can bring to people if they're curious about it. And that feels like a really important piece to my practice. So that's just part of me. I'm also an artist. I do portrait art, and I work with acrylic paints and charcoal and pencil. And that's just always been a part of me. My earliest drawings were like 3 years old. and that shows up in my work in the therapy space, as well as, when I go home, and it's a part of my self-care practice. And I can be found doing a lot of other things too. I tend to be a truth teller and an antagonist wherever I go. So I like to instigate conversations that I feel matter, and do things like this, be bold and brave about the conversations that I think need to be had.
Yeah, that's a great intro, and I have a lot to kind of branch off from some of the things you said, and I appreciate that you aren't afraid. I know you have multiple Instagram accounts. You have one for like your art. I think you have a personal one as well as like one for your business. And but regardless, you're not afraid to talk on important issues and things. You're not one of those folks who's like afraid, like, nope. My social space has to be happy, sunshine and rainbows all the time, and I can't discuss anything that might offend people or might lead to uncomfortable discussions. So I always appreciate that, and I think that's important for everybody, regardless of what field you're in.
Yeah, thank you. And I would say the same for you. It's certainly something I admire about you. And let me add that you said, you're not afraid to. Yes, I am.
Well, yeah, that's a
I
good
am
point.
very
Sure.
much afraid to.
No, I hear you.
That's where the anxiety shows up for me. But I do it anyways.
There you go.
Right?
And that's what makes it brave. So,
Yeah.
So I appreciate that for sure. I'm sure others do as well. I also like how the way you describe therapy, some of it sounds like traditional, like, yep, this is how therapy works. This is how people understand it. But you've added like your own take on it, and maybe like a more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like more up to date, like a little bit, with the times, where, you're different than, someone who's been doing it for decades. And, you also have, you'll put fun like TikTok type videos on your account sometimes it makes like therapy and mental health fun, it doesn't always have to be like, oh, mental health time and be sad and talk about what's ailing us. You make it fun with doing those things. So I like that. I like how you do that too.
Oh, thank you. Well, I got to use the tools that we're given.
Right.
and as much as I wish that I could take social media out of my life sometimes, it is the portal that I connect through to a lot of people through. So I can appreciate it for that. And it's also an art form, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a place that I can be creative. And you're right. There is a lot of stigma around mental health. And maybe this would be a point to differentiate something, mental health versus mental illness.
Absolutely. Yes, please do.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all have a mind that's conditioned by our culture and our family and, what school we went to, the town we grew up in, our ideologies, all of this comes together to create a collection of ideas we have about ourselves. And so some of those ideas that we have about ourselves are really functional and helpful in navigating the world. And we could call that our mental health. And then some of the things that we think about ourselves or some of the ways that we've developed over our lifetime become a little less functional and less helpful and can become quite rigid and, to use a word, dysfunctional. And that's more of what we're talking about when we say mental illness. And I want to put that out there because it's a spectrum, right? Some of your listeners may resonate with that if they've ever gone through periods of intense grief or sadness and depression, that there may have been a time in their life where things weren't going so well inside, between the ears. It was just a really challenging time. And that doesn't, it doesn't mean that you're, broken. Right?
Right, absolutely.
It's such a natural part of being human. I tend to have a different view on this spectrum of mental illness and mental health than other practitioners, and some people may agree with me and some people won't. So I'll just preface it with that. I think that when we, as a field of mental health practitioners, pathologize, which means we make something wrong with what is actually just a natural ebb and flow for many of us, just being humans. I think that actually it contributes to this stigma where we feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me, or there's something to be ashamed of. And that's one of the first conversations that I'll have with clients is that more likely than not, the symptoms that we're talking about that you might be coming in and sharing about, the things that are showing up in your relationships or in your own inner world that are no longer serving you have probably been helpful to you at one point in your life. And maybe if not in your life, perhaps your parents' life or your grandparents' life, or as an adaptation to this culture that we live in that asks us to do a lot of things that are not all that natural, but that we've sort of collectively accepted as the way things are.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. Absolutely. And I appreciate you, talking about that, because, yeah, you're right. Mental health, mental illness is kind of used interchangeably a lot of the times, whether you're reading something, someone's comments online, or even sometimes in the news and things. And I think it's important to differentiate that for multiple reasons. Like, everybody should be working on mental health. Some people might need something more intensive than others, but things like wellness, like you meant earlier, which you said earlier, you kind of alluded to, your art is something that is good for your wellness. And, everybody kind of needs that outlet, something that makes them feel better and helps their brain and helps them relax or whatever. But yeah, mental illness means there's something like any other illness that you need, maybe a little extra help with, maybe medicine, maybe not. Not everybody does the medicine route, and that's fine. Yeah, so I think it's important to differentiate that. And you know me, we've talked about mental health last time you're here and just in general, and we've exchanged messages on socials and stuff about it. But I think it's always important to me and you and to a lot of people. But these last few years, whether it's coming out of the pandemic and there seems to possibly be an increase in things like depression and anxiety. We know there was an increase in overdoses, which obviously is related to a mental illness as well, with addiction. It seems like it's on the tip of everybody's tongue. Also, gun violence. We hear people talking when people start debating things about like mass shootings that have happened recently. You hear mental illness brought up a lot, and how that can kind of affect the discussion and maybe increase the stigma, where people are like, oh, mental illness, people who are mentally ill are going to shoot up schools, which isn't the case necessarily. They may have had a mental illness, but they may not have. And not everybody who has a mental illness is going to be violent, of course. So I think I know I'm kind of rambling, but mental health is out there in the discussion constantly about all sorts of different things. And so I think it's important to make sure we're all working with the same definitions and understanding the words that we're using, because they have so much impact.
Absolutely.
I rambled.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have something to say back, hopefully.
Yeah, no rambling there. No rambling detected. I do think that in these last couple of years, the willingness for people to talk about their own mental health has grown. And perhaps that's because we've all gone through some massive, out of our control, collective trauma together.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's looked different for everyone, but it is something that has touched everyone. And so there was maybe a door opened, like, oh yeah, you're struggling, me too. But we're also dealing with, and I don't see any end in sight in this, to be honest. We're also seeing an increase in stress, an increase in isolation, an increase, oh my gosh, in the input of stimulation and news. And I can't log on to my YouTube channel without just video after video of something terrible that's happening in the news. And we have to be aware that that is not a natural, again, it's part of our culture. It's part of a normal part of our culture now, but that is not something that our brains and bodies and nervous systems were hardwired to cope with.
Oh, absolutely.
So there is this like flooding of stress that we are all impacted by, whether we are aware of it or not. I know that's a bold statement, but I'm sticking with it.
No, I think you're right. I've read pieces that have referenced studies and things that you don't necessarily even realize that you're stressed or what stress is doing to your body. And a lot of times until it's too late, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is probably because you're stressed, and yeah, you don't even realize it.
Yes. People who would like to learn more about that, there's one of my favorite. He's actually a physician, but he later worked as a therapist and continues to. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate. He's actually coming to the Low Country Mental Health Conference. Just a shout out to that
nice.
in late July. No one's paying me to say that, but I am going to be in the front of the line there to see him. But he has a book called When the Body Says No. And it's a kind of a heady book. You know, he's a physician. He's goes through a lot of case studies and stuff. But essentially what he's saying is, if you don't set your limits, if you don't set the boundaries, then your body will. And I'm sure some of us are like, oh, yeah, that's happened to me.
Oh, yeah.
You know, whether it's a migraine or, you know, you physically hurt yourself, you hurt your back, our body will set its limits if we don't do it for it.
You know, you mentioned setting limits, too. It's not just, that your body necessarily, but when we're talking about generations and how they differ, and how we're just inundated with news everywhere we turn, but also social media, which things like Instagram can have been shown to be addictive, number one, for some people, and also can lead to people feeling crappy because you're seeing all these people who are seemingly always on vacation, always in the nicest clothes, always in shape, and that affects people as well. That's a different kind of stress and issue that even 20 years ago wasn't, the level that it is now. And people,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. And people can reach you very, very easily. They might not reach you physically by coming, in your face and at your door, but they can message you, they can email you, they can get you on all these socials. And that's a whole other level, which I that generations ago didn't have to deal with. Now, of course, every generation has their own type of trauma and collective traumas as well, whether it was a world war or, whatever else. But yeah, that seems to be one of our biggest issues in this generation is just the social media aspect.
Yeah. So that brings me to something, I was just talking about the increase in stress, this increase in social isolation, or that also looks like a decrease in real, genuine social connection, which, by the way, just to remind everyone, we are social mammals as humans. We like to think of ourselves as separate and a part of the animal kingdom and the rest of the world, but it's helpful really for us to remember that the way that our body and mind is hardwired is to be in a social group. And when we're talking about the ways that we, as our modern humans, have traded in genuine social connection with social comparison, right? What Johann Hari calls these junk values. It's like we've stopped getting the nutrition that we really need, that our body needs and our mental health needs, and we've traded it in for something that's really not that good for us, and it doesn't have any nutritional value. And so, to your point, we're looking at people's highlight reels.
Right, exactly.
Or we're looking at people who have hundreds of thousands of followers and who make it their job from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed to create content and curate an image which they're portraying as their life. But we're only seeing, again, their highlight reels, and we're comparing it to our normal everyday life. So of course we feel like we're failing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's there's nothing wrong. Your social media page, you do whatever the heck you want. You do whatever makes you happy. But you have to remember, if you're the person looking at it and it's making you feel bad, you have to you have to recognize that. And like you said, set a boundary, whatever that may be. Maybe unfollow that person. If you can't unfollow them, because they're a friend or whatever, you can mute their account so it doesn't pop up as, you have to recognize those things. People can put whatever they want on their social page. That's their call. But if you find it affecting you, you have to try to recognize that. It's tough because you get used to, I woke up, time to check this app and this app, or, it's lunch break, time to check that. It's tough to break those cycles, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, it is. And I am in there with you. Right?
Yep.
It's only when I take these detox times, or I put my phone away for the weekend, or I'm fortunate enough to go away for the weekend and unplug. And then I come back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I do this? I do.
Right.
I sit in front of this thing for how many hours a day? And it's amazing how you can seemingly adapt to that. Again, it's like that is something we've accepted as normal, but it's really not.
And
And to your point that each generation, I'm going to keep talking here.
No, please, no, absolutely.
Each generation has its own battles. Yeah.
Yes.
And we certainly have ours. But one thing I want to say about that, from this sort of evolutionary biological perspective, is that most of the battles that we are facing as modern Western civilized human beings are actually battles that our mind and body and our nervous system is not equipped to deal with. Right? So 200 years ago, let's say, if my main focuses are to keep my family fed and warm and safe, I actually have the skills in my mind and my body to help me take care of those things in a way that I'm not totally overwhelmed by them. Right. Or let's say even 20,000 years ago. Okay, let's go back way back. If my main challenge, if my generation's challenge at that time is just to stay alive and to stay fed, then my nervous system is quite prepared to do that, right? To stay alert for a predator that might be lurking in the bushes, to be on the lookout when my fellow humans are building a fire. I'm actually set up for that. I know how to do that. But the inundation of threat that we have through our screens today, whether it's the social comparison, which seems kind of benign in this moment when we're comparing it to a predator in the woods.
Exactly. Yes.
But that's my point, right? We're actually being bombarded with signals that our mind and body says, "Ooh, I'm not safe. I'm not safe." And the thing is, we don't have anything to do about that. Right?
Absolutely.
How do I fight back my 10 YouTube videos that are showing me wars? So what that actually does is it activates our nervous system. It tells us you are not safe, you are under threat, which for people who don't know, when our bodies are under threat, that means like our blood flows differently.
Right.
That means that our frontal lobe, the part of us that thinks rationally and logically, goes offline because our amygdala and our fight, flight, and freeze response has been activated. But because we're in this modern system where I don't actually have a bear to fight off, I have just the idea of Putin's regime taking over the world.
Right.
How that is absolutely overwhelming to my nervous system.
That's interesting.
There's not much that I can do in the day to day to combat that.
It's interesting to look at. I mean, number one, you're speaking my language as someone with anxiety. That's exactly what it is, with the way you just described it. Our bodies, I never thought of it that way. I mean, I did a little bit because therapists and whatnot have mentioned it before, but your body with anxiety is reacting to danger. It thinks you're in danger, and it's doing the things your body is supposed to do when you're in danger. Of course, you're not like you said, you're not actually in danger of dying in all likelihood. There's something else that has triggered that feeling, but your body doesn't know the difference between, I have to do, a public speaking thing, or a bear is about to attack me, like you said. Your body reacts the same regardless if it gets to that level of fright or anxiety or whatever. But yeah, I didn't really, I've heard that talked about before, like you just have to, convince yourself you're not in any danger and, yada, yada, yada. But I never realized, like, yeah, that's right. We haven't evolved to the point where our response is on the same level of the threat that we're facing. Our threats aren't as serious, like you said, in comparison. But our bodies haven't evolved to the point where they react, in the appropriate manner.
That's right.
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way. It's pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, you said that beautifully. Here's one of the one of the gifts of anxiety. That it's a blessing and a curse.
Yes, yeah.
Because anxiety thinks that you might be in danger, it's also scanning the environment for danger.
Right. Yep.
Because if it's there, it wants you to know about it. Yeah. So it actually makes it, again, when we're in a modern world where we're inundated with, again, dangers from a distance.
Right.
Anxiety sees that, right, and says, "Oh, that's why you feel so tense and stressed and and disconnected." Right? It's right there, and you should feel that way. And here's all the other reasons why you should feel that way. So it is trying to help us get ahead of the things and help us stay alive, right? Because that's what originally it was designed for.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, it's like there's a therapist, Peter Levine, who says essentially what we're talking about is that we have a system that is designed for like a drip feed. And instead, what we're doing as modern humans is opening a fire hose wide open and into our mouths.
100%. Not only the social media aspect of comparison, but yeah, even like we've kind of alluded to, but think about a big news story, let's say like the, JFK, being shot and killed. And that was like a collective traumatic experience for Americans back then and obviously affected them. But at that point in time, what were there, 3 or 4 channels? And when the coverage was done for the day, it'd be something else on TV or they had something else to watch. Whereas here we have a mass shooting, or even going back to September 11th, it's on every single channel regardless. And we have hundreds of channels and it's on every social media platform, and people's opinions and thoughts, which just make it worse because you see terrible opinions and terrible thoughts. And yeah, it's different. It's not that the event itself is more traumatic than anything our parents or grandparents have gone through, but it's just like it's so hard to get away from it.
Yes, it's a boundarylessness, right? There's no in trauma work we talk about how important containment is. Containment implies there's some sense of boundary around something, right? That makes it actually more manageable for me. And so, maybe we've just exacerbated people's anxiety in this conversation.
Yeah,
but what I want to say is the control that we do have in modern day is that we can set our limits to this exposure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then, I don't know if I'm going to guess you feel this, but I'll just speak for myself, that sometimes when we're in this sort of rhythm where we're just checking the news feed, we're checking the news, the emails, staying up to date with all of it. There's a way in which even imagining ourselves unplugging from that leaves us with this like restlessness and like, what do I do? I need to be in there. I need to be
like FOMO.
And that's exactly what I mean when I say anxiety is it's on the prowl. It's like, no, you can't shut me. You can't shut me down. I need to be on top of all this stuff because you need to know what you should be afraid of.
Yep, absolutely. No, I definitely feel that 100%.
Yeah. And I'm speaking from lived experience here.
Yes.
But we can develop some sense of spaciousness around that, where we see that that's what it's trying to do. And then we come in as the bigger adult self and we say, thank you, anxiety, for looking out for me. And I'm going to shut my screens down. I'm going to unplug for the next 5 hours or so this evening, and I can pick you back up when I need to. Okay, so you've still got my back. I know you're there, and I'm going to give myself some space to go do something else. And then I can choose when and how I bring you back in.
I know you're doing the therapy thing right now where we have to be nice to our anxiety, but I hate being nice to my anxiety.
Yeah.
But I get it. I know what you're saying. I get it. I do.
It is the hard practice, right? Like
something that brings you pain and suffering. You like, thank you for that. It's tough. It is tough. But yeah, exactly. It's part of the work, 100%. as we start to wind down, I do want to talk about, we've talked about current events and stuff. And at the top of the show, I talked about, we're recording this on Friday, June 24th, about the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, which to a lot of people can obviously be very troubling, and words that I can't even think of right now that are much more important than troubling. But regardless, whether it's Roe v. Wade, whether it's gun violence or any of the other things we talked in the news, and how much people are consuming all these things, you and I had talked before, and I mean, I'm just going to read, one of your suggestions that I think, because I just think you worded it really well, but also we didn't realize that it was going to be even more prescient right now. But what's a systemic view of wellness that includes things like politics and social action? I think you worded that so beautifully, so I had to read it out of your message.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, all of this is just really close to home today. As a woman with privilege, I think I'm grieving not necessarily for myself, but for all of us, right? I mean, what we're talking about is our freedom to make healthcare decisions, to make decisions about our bodily autonomy. And we don't know where this one decision is going to lead, right? Mm-hmm. And to be honest, the fear and the sadness and the anger can be really overwhelming. And so, I let myself feel it today.
Yes.
And that's what I would say to anyone who comes into my office. I'm like, look, if it's coming up, it needs to be felt. You don't have to enjoy it. You don't have to ooh, this is fun. I mean, you don't have to want it or even welcome it. But if it's here, then it needs to be here.
It's better than pushing it down, right?
Yes. And what we find is, I say this to my clients, will recognize this: what we resist persists. So if I'm
well said,
fighting the feelings, then they're just going to keep yelling at me louder. And anxiety loves to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
She's not listening, so we got to get louder.
Yep, 100%. I was thinking that as you said it. And you definitely continue with this. I know you have some great points, but I just want to quickly say, you mentioned that you were feeling it today, and you did post on one of your socials like a picture of you crying, being upset, and saying this exact thing. And I think that's also great, because you're not, you're putting out what I really am feeling today, not a highlight reel. This is real life. This is what I'm feeling. But you also put in, underneath it, that's okay. You guys should be doing it too. So I wanted to say thank you for doing that, and practicing what you're preaching right now.
Yeah, thank you. And that was another scary one. I pressed post and then just put my phone away. Like, you don't need to just do it and let it be.
Yeah.
But here's what's most important to me about that is that we're not getting just stuck in the grief or stuck in the rage or stuck in the sadness, but that we are using these energies that are deeply biological, that are saying, this is not okay, and something needs to be different. Something needs to change, right? In a way, this isn't different than the boundary work we were just talking about. Boundaries are often most enforced by our anger, right? We get big, we yell, we push, we create space around us through anger, and that is a way that we create boundaries. Now, I see that at the individual level, but I also see the need for that at this collective level. That when I'm saying, you don't get to tell me, you 7 people up there in your protected box, you guys don't get to tell me what I do and don't do with my body. That's a boundary, right? So I have every right to feel angry and hurt by that, but I'm not going to get stuck there, because that's just hurting me.
Right.
If I'm staying stuck there. But so this is what I would say to everyone: find the people who are already doing the work. I look at organizations like Citizen Well, Vote Pro-Choice. I mean, there are many organizations out there who are already educated, prepared, and resourced for this sort of call to action. So you don't have to invent the wheel, right? And these organizations also take their lead from Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, and are not creating the wheel themselves. You know, they're listening to people who have lived through oppression and experiences of having their bodily rights and autonomy robbed of them. So we need to listen to them about how to navigate this. And yeah, I just think, you know, I've had some people comment on that post today that they feel hopeless and that they're not going to vote because it doesn't matter. And I'll tell you, if there's anything that riles me up more, it's to hear that people are willing to wave their own white flag before they've even stepped into the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, as you were talking about, you know, using your energy to get out there, you know, that's not everyone can do that. And I know you would say the same. And you can't, you know, you don't have to be on the front lines. You don't have to be out at protests in 90-degree weather. You know, you don't have to do any of that. That if you can't do that, that's fine. But to sit out something like voting, that's a tough one. I mean, everyone can do their own thing, of course. But yeah, I hate to hear that people are already like so defeated that they're not even going to try. We need votes and not I think we've learned that, okay, yeah, maybe in South Carolina, we're not going to, you know, you might not get the senator you want or the governor you want. I mean, but there's no chance if you don't try, of course, but down ballot is super important too.
Absolutely.
Schools and
the
everything.
Thing is, you know, I've always lived in a state where my vote doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, that's
quote
just,
unquote.
That's just my reality. Right. But my voice does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And even if even if I didn't vote my senators in, well, they still have to listen to my voicemail.
100%. Yep, exactly. And people can be moved. Maybe not in a month, maybe not in a year, but people do change their mind over time if they're still in office, you know, so it doesn't hurt to get, and the more that you are out there talking about changes, the more that there's a better chance that other people will eventually understand a side maybe they didn't and join your side, you know, but if you're quiet, no one's going to do that.
Yes, and I think that this broadly ties back to mental health in a way, and mental illness, right? If we are willing to be brave and speak or show what is not just our highlight reel, right? If we're able to say the hard things, it also gives other people permission to do that as well.
Right.
And I think in a state or let's just say, if you are in a local culture that doesn't agree with you, then that's all the more reason why your voice is needed. You know, not so that you're going to bend the majority, again, in your culture. And I'm thinking about South Carolina specifically for us.
Yes, of course.
Not that you're going to change the majority voting bloc's mind, but you are giving permission to everyone else who sees the things the way that you do, to have space and room and the courage to say the thing that they want to say.
Well said. I agree 100%. And before we let you go, we'll talk about some good stuff you got going on. Some pretty new. I think you launched it this year, Community Constellations, which may be helpful to people listening. Could you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I will do my best.
You'll be fine.
So Community Constellations is, it's kind of my baby this year. It's a once a month group experiential workshop that is inspired by work known as family constellations. Some of your listeners may be familiar with that or may have at least heard the term. It's considered an alternative therapy, and in many ways it is. It's a little outside the box. But, you know, when I sit with people, as these sessions begin, we meet on the first Thursday of every month. And I sit with them and I try to explain to them what it is we're going to explore together, knowing that I'm going to fail to do so. And it's funny now that we've run 4 of these groups now, and the people who are returning, they laugh with me now because they watch me try to explain it to the new faces. And I might turn to them and I'll say, what would you say? And they'll go, you just got to do it first. You just got to see it and have your own experience of it. But if people are curious about this very ambiguous thing I'm describing, they can follow me on Instagram at Community Constellations. And my professional Instagram is Chelsea Green Creates. And both of those platforms will just have more information about what community constellations are, as well as the event links when they go live. Our next one is July 7th, and it's going to be at Hampton Park. The group is donation based. I'm trying to make it accessible to everyone. But in general, what people can expect is a group of people coming together to explore some of these hard to look at relationship dynamics that we might all be experiencing in our own ways, like miscommunication or people in our family who are hard to connect with, or who have their own, maybe mental illnesses, or have their own grief that causes them to show up in a way that has an effect on us, right? And so all of the work that I do, but particularly in community constellations, is birthed out of the idea that we are not separate individuals isolated from our people and our environment, but that we are intimately connected and affected by the people that we love and the people in our lives. And so community constellations give us a place and a space to explore that in an embodied and experiential way. And that's about all I can say.
No, it's good. And we'll the links you mentioned, the Instagram accounts, I'll put that in the show notes, of course, so people can find some more information. But you also have a retreat coming up, right, that you wanted to talk about?
I do, yes. Thank you, Christian. Yeah. This is a retreat that's near and dear to me for so many reasons. It's called The Art of Belonging. It's at the Wellbeing Retreat Center in Tazewell, Tennessee. So it's literally in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Tennessee. It's 160 acres of untouched, pristine mountain air surrounded by the Powell River. They don't hunt on the land. There's no Wi-Fi. There are no clocks in the cabins. It is just like the perfect place to get away from civilization and to rediscover yourself in a group setting. So the weekend is July 22nd to 24th this year. And again, you can find more information about that on my Instagram account in the link tree. And you can also visit my website, which is anewbeginningtherapy.com. And Anu is spelled ANU after a beloved dog that I had. And so, yeah, you could go to the events page and just check into the Art of Belonging retreat. And in general, I would just say, if you're looking for a time and a space to really unplug and reset, and if the things that I've talked about today resonate with you at all, then this is going to be something that you don't want to miss. So I highly recommend it. Even though I work on the weekend of it, I feel like it's just such a refresher for me to be there in that very special place at Wellbeing Retreat Center. So, yeah, thank you for letting me come on and share about it, Christian.
Well, of course, happy to. And I'm sure the conversation it'll resonate. They'll find some helpful tidbits that we were chit-chatting about. And also, some of these projects you're working on, the retreat and community constellations, I think are beneficial to people in our community as well. So I appreciate you sharing them with me and my audience. Anything else as far as websites or any other plugs that we missed?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, Chelsea Green, my guest for her second time, another awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your expertise and opinions with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
So that's it. Not a sunshiny episode by any stretch of the imagination, but I hope it was helpful, whether it was cathartic just to hear about it, and more importantly, instead of hearing me whine and complain, Chelsea hopefully gave you some good insight, some good things to keep in mind going forward, and how you can feel better about things that are going on and put those things into action. So a couple notes before I leave. First, the normal thank you for listening. If you want to support holycitycenter.com/shop, you can purchase some merchandise. Some people have. I'm still donating the rest of 50% of merchandise sales this month to We Are Family in honor of Pride Month. So keep that in mind. You can also help by going to patreon.com/holycitycenter to sign up for that. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins, my producer with LMC Sound System. And thanks to Tyler Boone for the music you hear in each and every episode. Before I leave, two things. One, Sunday, the 26th, so the day before this episode comes out, will be the fourth anniversary of my friend Richard Bachschmidt passing away. He died by suicide in 2018. So I just want to mark that date and say that so many people here still miss him, and I still like to talk about mental health, not just because my own struggles with it and friends' struggles with it, but he had that issue, and he said in one of his last shows, he was talking about Anthony Bourdain and saying how people still didn't get it, because people were saying things like, he's so rich and he has the best life. How could he end his life? How could anything be that bad? And he said, that's the problem. People don't talk about this stuff enough, and we need to talk about it more. And, that stuck with me, especially after hearing him say that after he had passed. So that's one of the other reasons I try to talk about it a lot. So look after your friends during these tough times. Introduce them, let them know you're there for them. If you feel like people are struggling, give them the suicide hotline number, or you can also text a suicide hotline. And there's all other resources out there. So I wanted to mark that. But also, if you are interested in trying to help protect abortion rights in South Carolina, specifically, we might not be able to protect the rights, but we can promote access. And maybe that means other states. Even though we have heard, yes, that there may be some states that will try legislation that will criminalize going to another state to have an abortion. We'll see how that goes. But there's some organizations in town that are doing, or in the state that are doing work, and I'll give you those names. Just Google them. I'll also put the donation links in the show notes for you to help. One is called the Palmetto State Abortion Fund. They want to make sure every South Carolinian who needs an abortion can access one. So that's one. There is the Carolina Abortion Fund. They have a helpline that'll be a resource for low-income patients needing help paying for their abortion care. That's based out of Durham, North Carolina, but they service people here in South Carolina as well. ARC Southeast, who also fight against barriers to reproductive care. You can donate to them. So those are three organizations, and we're doing work in the Carolinas, in a couple specifically here in South Carolina. If you're feeling frustrated, not sure what to do, you can donate to them, or look up some of the resources and see what else you can do if donations are not something you can swing at this time. So just wanted to put that out there. And as always, good night and good luck.